Ha gute Woche. Rebbe Gesundheit began to Farbrengen that this is a Shabbos, this Shabbos, Parshas Vayetze, is a Shabbos in the month of Kislev. And the month of Kislev is a very special month in general, and particularly for Chabad Hasidim, it is a very meaningful month. The month of Kislev we have Tes Kislev, 9 days in the month of Kislev, which is the birthday and the day of the Yortzeit of the Mittler Rebbe, the son of the Alter Rebbe. Yud Kislev is the day the Mittler Rebbe was released from prison. Then we all know what we have on Yud Tes Kislev, which is the day when the Alter Rebbe was released from prison. And that is the day which, as of Yud Tes Kislev, Hafatzas HaMayonis, the spreading of Chassidus, began with a much stronger force than it was prior to Yud Tes Kislev. This is, the Rebbe referred to there's a famous Sikha from the Rebbe Rashab, the Frierdiker Rebbe's father, where he explains that when did Hafatzas HaMayonis, the spreading of Chassidus by the Alter Rebbe, when did it really begin with a force and in a very strong way? It began after he was released from prison, after Yud Tes Kislev. And then we have, towards the end of the month, we have Chanukah. And Chanukah also has a special shaykhus to Chassidus, because as explained, Chassidus is compared to Shemen. Shemen, oil, which this is what the whole Ness of Chanukah is all about, is compared to Pnimiyus HaTorah, to the part of Torah, which is the Pnimiyus, the internal part of Torah, Chassidus, Torah Chassidus. Here the Rebbe referred to the famous expression from Reb Chaim Vital, the student of the Arizal. What he writes regarding to Pnimiyus HaTorah, he writes that it would be with the learning of Pnimiyus HaTorah, Bei Yifkun B'nei Yisrael Mi Bei Galusa. It'll be with the learning of Pnimiyus HaTorah, Yidden will go out of Golus. This will lead to Yidden going out of Golus. Actually, it's the same idea as Hafatzas HaMayonis Chutza. By spreading the wellsprings of Chassidus, by doing that, it will bring to the Ka'asim, to the coming of Mashiach. And he also uses the expression, the Yisparnasun Minei, which is an expression which the Rebbe quotes very often, which simply means, it's in Aramaic, but it has to do with the word parnasa, meaning that Pnimiyus HaTorah would be learned to such an extent that we will be fed with it. It will be like a parnasa. What is the meaning of parnasa? Parnasa means it provides our needs. So on the spiritual end, he's talking spiritual needs. Pnimiyus HaTorah will be in a way of the Yisparnasun Minei. We will have our parnasa from it. But stressed, not only are we talking about spiritual parnasa, it also affects the gashmistic parnasa. And here the Rebbe gave very strong brachas about parnasa, to have all our needs, whatever we need, not to be missing anything, we shouldn't lack anything, and to have anything and everything that you need, we should have it in the fullest measure. This is regarding Chodesh Kislev in general. Regarding this week's Sedra, this week's Sedra is Vayetze Yankov mi Be'er Sheva, Vayelech Haran. That Yaakov left Be'er Sheva and he went to Haran. Who sent him? His father Yitzchak. As we read in last week's Sedra, by the end of the Sedra, Vayishlach Yitzchak es Yaakov, that Yitzchak sent Yaakov. Where did he send him to? He sent him from Be'er Sheva, which was in Eretz Yisrael, which was where Yaakov was, and he sent him to Haran. What is Haran? Haran is the complete opposite. See, the stress is based on what Chazal teach us. What is the meaning of the word Haran? Besides it meaning a city, the city of Haran, the taich of the word Haran is Charoin Af, anger. What does it mean? That this was such a place that the attitude of the people in that place caused Charoin Af Shaloilam. This caused the anger of the world to the Rebishter. And where was Yaakov sent? Yaakov was sent to such a spot from Eretz Yisrael, and he was sent to where? To Haran. In other words, this is the whole idea of shlichus. The Rebbe spoke about it last week as well. that Yaakov, what is Yaakov? What is the difference between Yaakov and the other others? So we know that when we explain each of the three others, we know that Avram excelled in Gemilas Chesed, in acts of charity, in acts of kindness. What was Yitzchak's inyan? Yitzchak's inyan was Avodah, to serve the Rebishter. Yitzchak was like an oila tmima. He was like a whole and complete kolb. The inyan of Avodah. What was Yaakov's inyan? Yaakov's inyan was Torah. And though Yaakov's inyan was Torah, what did he do? He went from the very high madrege which he was, mil maila, went down to lamata, went down low, to what? To reach down low, to reach out where? To reach out to Chol. To an area of Charein Av Shaloilam, and to reach out there, in other words, to be effective even in an area of Chol. However, Yaakov knew that his going to Haran is only temporary. He knew ultimately what was his goal. His goal was, as we say in the Chazarah, V'shafti b'shalom el beis avi, that he will be able to return to his father's home peacefully. And Yaakov went with a lot of joy, with a lot of simcha. As the pasuk tells us, Vayisa Yankov Raglov, that Yaakov picked up his feet. Was Rashi explains what does it mean he picked up his feet. He walked very fast. Why? Because he found out the good news. When a person gets a good psura, when a person gets good news, it affects him to the extent that he even walks faster. So the same here by Yaakov. Yaakov knew that he started going to reach out to Haran. However, his ultimate goal was not to remain in Haran. What was the main inyan of Yaakov? That after he will complete whatever he was sent to accomplish in Haran, then he will go back to Be'er Sheva, then he will go back to Eretz Yisrael, then he will go back V'shafti b'shalom el beis avi. In other words, he knew that what he's going for is to Chassidische language, to be mevared in the tzutzos, to purify the sparks of Kedusha, which are in Haran, but not chas v'shalom to remain in Haran. Once he will be successful in achieving that, then what will he do? V'shafti b'shalom el beis avi. Then he will return in peace back to his father's home. Then he will be able to go back to Yitzchak. And here the Rebbe continues how we find a relation between the beginning of the Chazarah and the end of the Chazarah. What is the end of the Chazarah? The end of the Chazarah is V'Yaakov halach ledarkoi. There the Chazarah is referring, famous pasuk which the Rebbe always ties in to the end of the month of Tishrei. Comes the end of the month of Tishrei, then it is V'Yaakov halach ledarkoi. Yaakov goes out to his way. Every Yid goes out to his way. Everyone goes back to his place, to his area. And this is where, as the Rebbe used the expression today, also referring to that, the Rebbe used the expression mepakt ois de peklach. In other words, we come back from Tishrei, and we come back with heavy loads. We come back with a big baggage. And when we come back to our spots, we unpack all the peklach, all the merchandise which we were successful in acquiring during Tishrei. Comes when we come back to our places, everyone back in the designated area, and we get back into our yearly day-to-day calendar, day-to-day routine, we unpack the luggage and merchandise which we were successful in acquiring during the month of Tishrei. And here we are talking about Yaakov halach ledarkoi. So when we're talking in the pasuk of Yaakov halach ledarkoi, here it's already how Yaakov is coming back from Haran. What is the pshat? After Yaakov was already successful in Haran, and he accomplished whatever he was able to accomplish in Haran. So Yaakov now is halach ledarkoi. Now he's v'shafti b'shalom el beis avi. Now he's going back to his father's home after he completed the mission, what he had to do in Haran. Though Yaakov in Haran was extremely successful, Begashmius as well. As the pasuk tells us, Vayifroi ta'ish moed moed, he became extremely wealthy, and he owned slaves, and he owned a lot of cattle, a lot of fee. But nonetheless, this was not a reason for Yaakov to remain in Haran. Once Yaakov realized that his mission was already completed, and whatever he was supposed to do in Haran, he did, Yaakov did not remain in Haran any longer. What did Yaakov do? He immediately went back to Eretz Yisrael, v'shafti b'shalom el beis avi. Now, talking on this inyan, on the avodah of Yaakov and Chorah, which actually this can be compared to the same avodah which every Yid has while we are in Golus. What is the whole union of Yidden in being in Golus? It's also similar to the same idea. We are in an area which is not Eretz Yisrael, the same with the spiritual Madrege. We are not in what Eretz Yisrael stands for. We are in an area which is Choron. And in Choron, what is the avodah of a Yid? The avodah of a Yid here is to be mevarer, to purify the netzutzis kedusha, the sparks of kedusha, which are all over the world. So the Rebbe says, with this we can understand. It's explained. We say in the Haggadah, Baruch HaMokoim, blessed is the Rebishter, Baruch Hu, Sha'HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Chishev Esakeitz Lasos. That the Rebishter made a calculation, when is the Kates, when is the end of Golus to take us out of Golus. Now there we are referring to the Rebishter that he made the calculation to take us out of Mitzrayim. But the same idea actually refers to the fact that the Rebishter will make the Kates to take us out of Golus. The question arises, what is the meaning? What are we praising the Rebishter? That the Rebishter has calculated the time to take us out of Golus. What's meant this? What does it mean? So the Rebbe is explaining. So it means the Rebishter realizing the avodah of Yidden in Golus. The Rebishter enjoys this. The Rebishter sees how Yidden are successful and uplifting the sparks of Kedusha wherever Yidden were sent. Or in all the shlichus which each and every Yid coming down into this world, this is also a shlichus. And in Golus, Yidden are so successful in the avodah of lasos lo yizbarach dira betachtonim, in the avodah of making this world a residence for the Rebishter. So there is room to say that the Rebishter is enjoying so much this avodah that this may lead to it that he may postpone the kates, meaning he will take us out of Golus a little later, because he's enjoying Hayidna heavily involved in the avodah of making this world suitable for a dira lo yizbarach. So we say, even though the Rebishter appreciates very much this avodah of Eden, but at the same time, Baruch HaMokim, Baruch Hu, praises the Rebishter, Sha'HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Chishev Esakeitz Lasos, that the Rebishter did calculate the kates, the time that when it comes the time that we have to go out of Golus, the Rebishter does not delay it and takes us immediately out of Golus. I'm talking in the Inyan, how the whole Inyan of Golus is to see to it to purify the sparks of Kedusha that are in Golus, and to be successful in that. So the Rebbe referred to a famous expression which the Rebbe uses a lot of times. It's a Russian expression. The Rebbe uses it many times in Siches. The words are, if I pronounce it correctly, Taparu da Placha. And the Rebbe explained what it means. Da Placha means in Russian wood. What does Taparu mean? Taparu means the axe. So the saying is, the axe comes directly in contact with the wood. In other words, Maisa. Not just to talk theory, not just to talk, and it should remain in thoughts and in good ideas and so forth, but Maisa, that the axe is chopping the wood. In other words, we have to accomplish Maisa. We have deed is what counts most. So here we are using the expression, which is a Russian expression, and it's being interpreted in Kedusha. So the Rebbe is tying this into what Alter Rebbe explains in Tanya. Alter Rebbe in Tanya quotes a Zohar. Zohar there says, "Oh, the leisolig beina hoira mivatchenlei." Oh, in Aramaic means a piece of wood. A piece of wood which does not catch fire. Naturally, what fire are we talking about? We're talking about the fire of Kedusha. A piece of wood that's not catching Kedusha. Alter Rebbe quotes a Zohar that says, "Mivatchenlei," we chop this piece of wood. And by making it, it's no longer such a big piece, but by chopping it, it becomes more responsive to the fire that it will catch fire. Actually, what is he talking about? He's talking about the Nefesh Abahamis. But he's using an Aramaic expression and referring to it as a piece of wood, and he's using the expression "o'o," which means a piece of wood. So there are, when we talk in Lashon HaKodesh, we would say eitz, a piece of lumber. So the fact that we're not talking in Lashon HaKodesh, but we are talking already in Aramaic, this in itself shows that we're at a lower madrega. We're not in the level of Lashon HaKodesh, but we're at the level of speaking Aramaic. But on the other hand, Aramaic is still close to Lashon HaKodesh. No, that's why the Gemara is in Aramaic, the Targum is in Aramaic, and so. However, when we're coming down to the expression of Taporo da Placho, here it's already in a language of Lashon Ha'amim, in a language expression which is normally an expression of a Goyish language. In other words, this is going yet further. And here we are saying that we have to reach the piece of wood, reach the lumber. And if it doesn't catch fire, what has to be done? We have to chop it. In other words, this is the same idea in Ruchnius. In other words, the person has to make himself accessible to be able to, that the fire should catch him, to respond to the fire. To what fire? To the fire of Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam. And Memele, when he will respond to that, he will be able to be successful in the Avodah Sabirurim, and the Avodah, what the Neshama came down into this world for, which is to make this world a suitable residence for the Rebishter. Referring back to the Indian of the Yankov Halach Ladarkoi, that this has to do with Oispacken the Peklach, we unpack our luggage, our baggage, which we got during Tishrei. So talking about this Indian, the Rebbe also mentioned that it's a suitable time to remind that those who have accepted upon themselves good decisions, what it was during Chav Cheshvan, or a Chodesh Kislev, or even going back to the month of Tishrei, or even going back yet earlier during the month of Elul. There are those amongst us who have accepted upon ourselves decisions, good decisions. So we have to see to it that all these good decisions which were accepted upon ourselves during this period of time, that we should bring them all down into reality. It shouldn't just remain as a good decision, but it should come down and poil and maise and act, and indeed that we should fulfill all of these decisions which we have accepted during the last couple of months at various occasions. Later in the Farbrengen, about this expression of chopping wood and taporo da placho, while explaining it, he used an expression that when a child takes a piece of wood, a child can be creative to shape it into a certain form and so forth. He mentioned it while explaining the Inyan. Rebbe says that it's usual that in Farbrengen, it's common in the Farbrengen that we refer to a Rashi as well as to a Rambam, and also in Inyan the commentaries of his father on the Zoya. But these days there's another Inyan, let's use the expression, an Inyan shehazman grama, it's a cause of the time, and that has to do with the Inyan of the Svarim, that was the Pidyon Shvuyim, as this was the expression which the Rebbe used, that the Svarim were redeemed from them being captives. In other words, the Svarim were in a sense of kidnapped. They were in the wrong place. And the Svarim were nifded, the Svarim were released, were redeemed from where they were. Referring to this Inyan, Rabbi says that some of the Svarim were brought to him while he was on the Oihel, and he chose one of the Svarim that it should be printed immediately. This is a Sefer on Kabbalah by the name Derech Emunah, and it was printed within a few days during this week. The Rebbe says he already had an opportunity to learn from this printed Sefer on the Yoel. This is from a Mekubal, it's a Sefer in Kabbalah, and he's the author also of another Sefer which is called Avodas HaKodesh. This Avodas HaKodesh is a Sefer which is very often quoted in Chassidus. in the printed Chassidus as well as in those in Yonim Chassidus which are not printed yet. The Avodas HaKodesh is quoted very often. There's another sefer from the same author which is called Derech Emunah. This sefer, Derech Emunah, is set up in the format of the sefer is set up in a way of questions and answers. The name of the author was Reb Meir ben Gabbai. And the entire sefer is in a format of questions and answers, talking about the inyan of Pidyon Shvuyim, about the Svarim which were released. Here the Rebbe spoke out very strongly. Says he does not want to extend on speaking about it, because there's no inyan in extending discussion on an inyan which brings tsar, which brings the opposite of happiness, the opposite of joy, which aggravates. Not only does it aggravate, but the Rebbe used the expression, it's a davar hamavhil, it's a shocking thing. This is regarding those that felt that they want to celebrate the Pidyon Shvuyim of the Svar, the coming back of the Svar. He says you want to celebrate, you feel that you're a chassid, and therefore you feel that it's proper to dance and rejoice as a result that the Svarim came back. However, did you think, is this proper that your rejoicing on the return of the Svarim should be on the time of learning Torah? The Rebbe says you feel that you're a chassid and you want to rejoice and you want to be happy that the Svarim came back. Fine. Do it on your time of sleep. Do it on your time of eating. Do it on your own time of drinking. However, as far as time which is set aside for learning Torah, this is set time, which this time Torah has to be learned. One is going to say that he's going to rejoice on that time. Why? Because the Svarim came back. How does this correspond to what we say every day? V'salmo Torah keneget kula. The learning of Torah supersedes everything. Here the Rebbe also referred to the administration of the yeshivas. It says those that are in various capacities in yeshivas, whether they are Rosh Yeshiva, or they are Mashgichim, or they are Mashpiyim, or the Menahel of the yeshiva, it was their responsibility to see to it that this shouldn't happen. It was their responsibility. And on the contrary, if they are looking for the fact that they want to be respected by their students because of the positions which they are in, Rabbi says, when can they be respected by their students? When they will demand from the students what is their responsibility to demand from them. And the Rebbe kept on stressing he doesn't want to talk long about the subject. There's no Indian in talking long about it. But the Rebbe says, we'll talk about himself. He says, he is looked on very strange, use the expression muzah, which means strange, because of the fact that he demanded that the celebrating should be through learning Torah, and not to take away time from learning Torah and rejoice with the fact that the Svarim came back. The Rebbe said, when the Rebbe came out Monday before he went to the Yale, there was groups of people all in front of 770. The Rebbe was about to go into the car and leave to the Yale, so the Rebbe turned to the whole mass, to the whole crowd which was out there, and the Rebbe began simply, use the expression, screaming very loud. But the Rebbe criticized everybody for standing in the streets. The Rebbe says, what are you standing in the streets for? What are you looking at the police and looking at the birds? Is this how the Don Notzach is celebrated? Is this how the return of the Svarim is celebrated? The Rebbe, while saying all this, the Rebbe says he went over to the window and he's looking out of the window and he sees what people are doing. People are standing dancing outside, and one is trying to attract another, and another is trying to attract another, and this is not how he expected the Don Notzach, the return of the Svarim, to be celebrated. So today again he says, he expressed himself that he feels that he's being looked on strange for putting a stop to this and stressing the importance that there's nothing which can take away the learning of Torah. Here the Rebbe referred to an expression. Rebbe says that an expression which was used by the previous Rabbeim regarding a person who learns Torah. Friedrich Rebbe said, he's taka learning a lot of Torah. However, the question arises, he is learning Torah. But what did Torah teach him? Was hat Torah emes gelernt? So for a person who is familiar with Torah and is learning Torah, he should also be well aware was hat Torah emes gelernt, what did Torah teach him, and therefore as a result of that should know how to act when it comes to such an occasion. That when it comes to such an occasion, the main inyan is Torah. Rebbe says, so that's why he chose to reprint one of the Svarim. And when we print a Sefer, the goal behind it is not that another Sefer is printed, so that we have another Sefer to put on the bookcase. Even though, when we take a Sefer, we take our money, and we go ahead and buy Svarim with the money. Even if we put them into the bookcase, it's also something which is worthwhile. This is a dinyan in itself. When a person takes his funds, which are chaye nafshe, it's the person can enjoy it, can enjoy this money for whatever his heart desires. And nonetheless, he sees it befitting to go ahead and take this money and buy svarim with it. So it's definitely a proper act. But how much more so is it that the svarim that which we buy, we should take use them and learn from them. Same thing, even a child that gets a gift, a sefer, so he didn't even have to spend the money for the sefer. But when the child sees how parents in the house treasure a sefer, and that a sefer is not only treasured when it's in its bookcase, but that a sefer is used and is learned from, this will bring the same warmth into the child, that the child will also react the same way to the svarim which he's getting. And Mela, the Rebbe referred to an inyan in this sefer, the sefer Derech HaEmunah, which the first question which he asks, it's a deep inyan in Chassidus and in Kabbalah, but it's a question ala olam, regarding the world, eich yesh lo manhig. How is it seen that the world has a leader, that there's somebody behind it, somebody heading everything which is happening in the world? This the Rebbe tied into what the Alter Rebbe explains in Shara Yichud V'Emunah. That we know that when the Rebbe created the world, it was created not yesh mi yesh, not something from something, but the world is created yesh ma'ayin. It is created something from ayin, from nothing, and therefore, in order that the world should survive, it has to come on constantly to the koyach Hashem, to the dvar Hashem, to the word of the Rebbe, which should be constantly mahava, machaya, constantly given chayis and existence into the world, so that the world should exist. And we know that Alter Rebbe gives a famous mashal on this, that when a carpenter puts together a table, being that the table is just composed from various pieces of wood, which is not a lumber, which is not yesh me'ayin, it's yesh miyesh, just putting together something from something. So just like the wood was able to exist before that, the wood can exist now, and now it will exist in the form of a table, in the form of a chair, in the form of a bench, whatever it was put into. However, when something is created against its nature, as the Alter Rebbe brings in Tanya, if a person, for example, will throw something, so as much as power he puts into the ball that he's throwing, that's how far the ball will travel. And afterwards the ball will come back. However, the question arises, all this is how we explain how the Rebbe created the world. However, being that the Rebbe is capable of doing everything, so we say that being that the world is created yesh mi'ayin, something from nothing, so this is something which is a tremendous accomplishment, something which is going against the realm of nature. A person cannot do it, and the Rebbe was able to do it, so that is why it has to come out to constant chayes from the Rebbe. But being that the Rebbe is a koil yochel, he can do everything, so just like he was able to create the world, he can create the world and create it in such a way that the world should not have to come on constantly to his chayis, to the dvar Hashem, to the word of the Rebbe, that should constantly see to it that the world exists. But basically, the answer, as the Rebbe explained it, which is based on the answer to this question, as it's explained here in the Sefer Derech HaEmunah, is that the Rebbe Taka wanted that the world should be run with the rules of nature. This in itself is the wish of the Rebbe. Memela, the Rebbe was the one who set up all the rules of nature for the world, and at the same time, being that he is the one that created the world, And the world was created, as the Alter Rebbe says in Shara Yichud V'Emunah, in a way of Yesh Me'ayin. And Yesh Me'ayin, according to the understanding of nature, the way the Rebbe to set up nature, the way we see it for our eye, cannot exist unless there is the Dvar Hashem, the word of the Rebbe, which constantly feeds life into Yesh Me'ayin so that Yesh Me'ayin will exist. So the Rebbe wanted Take to set up the way he created the world, that it should correspond to the rules of nature, which were also created by him. But this is the way it makes it easier for the person who was created, for the human being, to be able to understand and grasp all of these inyanim. The Rebbe Mitzad himself was definitely capable to create the world in any way. He could have created it in a way where he would inject chayis into it once on a one-time basis, and the world will exist. But in the way we understand Yesh Me'ayin, our understanding in Yesh Me'ayin is such, where we are, in our realization, Yesh Me'ayin is in a way that it constantly has to come on to life from its creator. So the Rebbe set it up in such a way that it should be like our eye understands it. It should be accessible to the Nivra, to the human being who was created by the Rebbe, to be able to understand it in his way. Now let us go to the Rashi in this week's Sedra. The Rashi is the second Rashi on Vayetze Yaakov. That Yaakov left Be'er Sheva and he went to Choron. The Rebbe says that when he said that he's going to learn this Rashi, it was told to him that 20 years ago in a Farbrengen he already explained this Rashi. The Rebbe says, however, if you will look back to what was discussed 20 years ago, there he spoke about this inyan, but did not explain it in the realm of Pshat, which this is what Rashi is all about. Like Rashi himself tells us, what is his inyan? Ani lo basi lefaresh ela pshuta shel mikra. That time he explained it al pi chsidus, which is taken an explanation in the inyan, but this does not apply to what Rashi is saying. Rashi has to be first and foremost understood in pshuta shel mikra, in the pshat of the pasuk, in the simple understanding of the pasuk. What does Rashi say on the word of Vayetze? Rashi says, really it should have said, Vayelach Yaakov Charon. This is the important part, that Yaakov left the Choron. Why does the Torah tell us also about Vayetze Yaakov me Be'er Sheva, that Yaakov went out of Be'er Sheva? So Rashi says as follows, Yitzias Tzadik min Amokim, when a Tzadik goes out of a place, Oisa Roshim, it leaves an impression. Shebizman Shat Tzadik Be'ir, at the time when a Tzadik is in the city, Hu Hoida, Hu Ziva, Hu Hadara. Rashi is using a triple expression, which, as we would learn, normally means he is the beauty of the city. A tzaddik is the beauty of the city. Yotza misham, once the tzaddik has left there, Pana hoida, Pana ziva, Pana hadar. So the beauty and the shine of the city has all left, because the tzaddik is the real beauty of the city. Rabbi says there's a very obvious question in this Rashi. Rashi is using three expressions to explain to us what happens when a tzaddik leaves the city. What does Rashi say? Pana hoida, Pana ziva, Pana hadar. Why does Rashi use three expressions? Rashi could have said that the beauty of the city disappears when the tzaddik leaves. It's not enough. Rashi uses a triple explanation. Three different terminologies. What happened to the city when the tzaddik leaves the city? Then now there's another question, which this question already is asked by Svar. Rashi is telling us what's happening to the city when a tzaddik is leaving. Therefore, when Yaakov left Be'er Sheva, the entire beauty of the city disappeared together with him. But there was tzaddikim left in the city. Yitzchak and Rivka. Yitzchak and Rivka, they remained in Be'er Sheva. So how can we say that the beauty of the city disappears when the tzaddik leaves? And this happened here. When Yaakov left, Yaakov's parents, Yitzchak and Rivka, who were definitely tzaddikim, they remained in the city. So why should the beauty of the city disappear? Why should it vanish? There are those mefarshim that want to say, in response to this question, that what Rashi means doesn't mean that the beauty disappears, it just decreased. Until now it had Yitzchak, Rivka and Yaakov. Now that Yaakov left, so the beauty of the city, the spiritual beauty of the city, was decreased. But this is not what Rashi says. Rashi says, Pana. Pana means it vanished, it left. It has left there completely. Pana ziva, Pana hoida, Pana ziva, Pana hador. So we cannot accept this interpretation. Truth is, Rabbi continues, that the source of this Rashi is a Medrash. It doesn't make it easier on us because we're not learning Medrash, we are learning Rashi. And as far as Rashi, even when Rashi quotes a Medrash, Rashi will only quote what is related to the pshat of the pasuk. As Rashi himself keeps on saying several times, Ani leibasi lefarish ela pshuta shel mikra. First and foremost, Rashi's prime concern is to explain the pshuta shel mikra, the pshat, the simple understanding of the pasuk. So now, when we look into the Medrash, in the Medrash there are two expressions, Pana ziva and Pana hadora. The third expression, which Rashi adds on first, Pana hoida, which obviously, as we will see in a minute, how the Rebbe is learning, but apparently all of them are different expressions referring to the beauty of the city. The shine, the beauty. So Rashi adds on the third expression on the two which he quotes from the Medrash. And all of this requires an explanation, requires reason. Why does Rashi not satisfy himself with the two expressions which he quotes from Medrash and adds on a third one, Pana hoida, Pana hoida, Pana ziva, Pana hador. Rebbe is explaining this. The child who is learning Chumash, and Rashi, the youngster who Rashi is teaching, obviously understood Lashon HaKodesh. Because this is the language which Rashi is writing his perush to him, his commentary. So the child understands what Rashi is learning, what Rashi is saying. So therefore we must say that when Rashi uses expressions of hoid, ziv, and hoda, the child who is learning the Chumash understands what this means. Incidentally, the Rebbe didn't mention it today, but he mentions it many times. We do notice in Rashi a pattern that when Rashi comes to a word which he feels the child will not understand in Hebrew, then Rashi tells him take the word in French. That's why we have many Rashis where Rashi puts it in the balaz. What is the balaz? Because the child may not understand the interpretation of this word in Hebrew, so Rashi tells it to him in the mother tongue of the child that he should know what it means. Otherwise, it seems that the child who is learning Chumash understands the Hebrew, the Lashon HaKodesh, which Rashi is using. Now, Rashi tells us Pana hador. What means hador? So there's a pasuk. V'hodarta pnei zokin. It's a pasuk further in Chumash. V'hodarta pnei zokin. And Rashi, when it comes to that pasuk, also does not explain the meaning of the hodarta. Rashi just says, how is it done? What does it mean? V'hodarta pnei zokin, you shall respect the older. So Rashi doesn't touch up what means v'hodarta, that v'hodarta means respect, because Rashi knows that the child understands what is v'hodarta. So now when Rashi is telling us here, Pana hadora, that when a tzaddik leaves the city, its hadora also leaves, so it's self-understood. What do we mean? There's a certain respect to a city. When does this area have the respect? When the tzaddik is in it. When the tzaddik leaves, it is Pana hadora. So it's understood what this means. Now we're going backwards like. What does Pana ziva mean? What does the shine? This is also something which is understood. The child knows that a sun has its shine, the moon has its shine. That's why we make a bracha on the new moon every month. So we can understand that there is a thing of something that shines. Just like there's something that shines in Gashmias, there's something that shines spiritually as well. So when there's a tzaddik living in a city, this is a spiritual shine which he brings into the city, into the area where he lives. Memela, now that Yankov is leaving, Pana Ziva, the shine which is in the city, is leaving. Now, what is Pana Hoida, the first thing which Rashi is mentioning? Pasuk tells us, we'll have later a Pasuk in Shemais, where the Pasuk tells us, Ki Koran Oir Pnei Moshe. Pasuk is describing the face of Moshe. The Pasuk tells us that there was, Rashi there explains that there was such a hoid, there was such a fear on the face of Moshe that nobody was able to look Moshe in his face when Moshe was talking with the Rebbe. So what is this? It's not a shine, it's not respect, it's a third thing. There's a certain feeling of fear which is instilled when the tzaddik is there. Now that Yaakov left Beersheva, all of these three things have disappeared together with him. When the Rebbe was raising the questions in this Rashi, he says, there are malamdim here at the Farbrengen that are present, teachers who learn with the children Chumash, and it would be interesting to hear how a malamed would teach up to the children all these three various explanations which Rashi uses regarding to whatever has disappeared from the city which Yaakov's leaving. In other words, how would we teach? How do we normally teach with children when we learn with them? Pana Hoida, Pana Ziva, Pana Hadara. Normally, Malamed who teaches it with a child usually puts them all three together in a general interpretation, and it means that the beauty of the city has disappeared. The Rebbe says they're even present here at the Farbrengen, people with white beards, and these people definitely learn the shiurim of Chitas every day. They're learning it for years. Chitas, as it was instituted to learn Chumash every day, the Parsha, with the commentary of Rashi. And how do they learn? When it comes to this pasuk, how do they translate? Why does Rashi use three different expressions? Pana Hoida, Pana Ziva, Pana Hadara, which all obviously is the same idea that the beauty of the city, the shine of the city, has disappeared when the tzaddik left the city. However,
how does the kid know the thing from Shmos? He hasn't learned Shmos yet.
Well, he hasn't learned V'data Pnei Zokan either. V'data Pnei Zokan is a pasuk in Kedoshim, which is in.
Over there, he said there's no need to explain it.
But it's not the idea that he hasn't learned it. He knows these words. V'haraya, that even when the Torah says V'hadarta Pnei Zokan, Rashi doesn't touch up what V'hadarta means. When you'll tell a child who's familiar with Hebrew what is Ziv, and what is Hoda, and what is Hoid, the child will know, just how the Rebbe is learning, that it's three different inyanim. Hoid is a type of a respect which has resulted in a fear. And this is what, like we find by Moshe Rabbeinu, Koran Oyer Pnei Moshe, that the face of Moshe was shining to such an extent that people were afraid to look at Moshe. So Memela, we are teaching here what is the inyan of Hoid. Hoid is an inyan of a shine taka, but a shine which results with a fear. It comes to Ziv, the child knows Ziv is a shine. It's a different type of a shine that produces light. Just like the sun produces its light, the moon produces its light, stars produce light. The same way there's a spiritual light which is produced by a tzaddik living in an area. And then there's a third thing which is Hoda. And again the child who's learning Chumash and is well versed in Hebrew knows that Hadar means respect. So which is a third inyan. So it's all three different inyanim. It's not just like, not to say that Rashi is repetitious and using the same word three times, same idea and just using different words. It's like a three different inyanim which are contributed to a city when a tzaddik lives in the city, and once a tzaddik leaves, all of these inyanim go along together with it. Now what remains is regarding Yitzchak. Yitzchak was still a resident of Beersheva, and why do we say Pana Hoida, Pana Ziva, Pana Hadar? So this the Rebbe explains is very simple, which is also self-understood. We find in the Torah that Yaakov, when he prayed, he was mispal to the Rebishter, he said, Elokei, the Father, the God of Avraham and the God of Yitzchak. So Rashi there comments, we know the Rebishter is not miyached, does not dedicate the Shechina on those who are still alive. How come he referred to Yitzchak at the time Yitzchak was still alive at that time? Elokei Avraham is understood, Avraham wasn't alive anymore. But why did he say Elokei Yitzchak? So Rashi explains us that Yitzchak at that time was blind. He was already blind. Yitzchak, when he was blind, a person who is blind, Rashi quotes from our sages, is a person who is a Sagi Nahar, who does not see, is Choshev Kemeis, is equivalent to a person who is not alive anymore. So Memela, Yitzchak, at this point, he was a person who was locked up, closed up in his house. He was not effective anymore. Very simple, because he was blind already. So Rivka, on the other hand, besides the fact of a woman is kol kvuda bas melech ptima, a woman is indoors and is not as outgoing as a man. But besides that, Rivka was busy, was occupied with Yitzchak, taking care of Yitzchak. Yitzchak was a summa, he was blind at the time, and he wasn't involved with the people anymore, to such an extent that we say that when a person is blind, he's chashiv kemeis. So Memele, the tzidkus, though Yitzchak was definitely a tzaddik, no question about it, but to say that it had an effect on the city, that it added shine and respect and fear to the city, it didn't, because Yitzchak at that time was already considered like a mace. And that is why once Yaakov left the city, the Rashi uses the expression Pana Haida, Pana Ziva, Pana Hadara, the beauty and the fear and the shine and the respect of the city all disappeared, all went away totally, with Yaakov's leaving the city. Regarding the Shir and Rambam, halachas and Rambam which are being learned today are the halachas of the Dalit Shoimrim. You know, learn in Sechta Bava Metzia that there are 4 categories of various watchmen, a guard, various 4 types of guards according to halacha, and it's all based on psukim. We know that there is a shomer chinam and a shomer sacha, the one who watches something for free, one who is compensated to watch something, and there is also a seicher, which means one who rents something, and then there's a shoyel, the one who lends something, borrows from another person, and he does not compensate him for it, he just did it to him as a courtesy. And we know that the Torah tells us the various halachas, responsibilities on each one of the shomrim. Naturally, when one is a shomer, when one watches something and is being compensated for the watching, his responsibilities are more than the one who watches and watches it for free and is not being compensated. If somebody does something on a voluntary basis, his only responsibility is pshia, when he did something intentionally whereby he did not watch the thing. He left it under an open door. But let's assume if the thing was stolen or the thing got lost, he's not responsible. As opposed to the guard who's being compensated for his watching, he's responsible if it was stolen. He's responsible if he lost it, because if he's being compensated, it is his responsibility to watch the item properly. Then we come to the shoyel. The shoyel is the one who's borrowing. The one who is borrowing, so he has the highest level of responsibility, because he's not paying for what he's getting this item for, this object for. He's not compensating for it. On the contrary, the other person was nice enough to be a mashil, to lend it to him. So what if something goes wrong, he's fully responsible. However, the halacha is, if ba'olav imoy, if the owner of the object is present when something goes wrong, when it breaks, let's assume, halacha tells us that then he is not responsible to compensate for the loss which he caused. This is, the Gemara learns it from a pasuk, that if ba'olav imay, if the balabas is there with him, he is pater, then he is not obligated to pay. This is the halacha. The Rebbe says we know that all halachas are, as the Rambam Rebbe often quotes from an expression of the Rambam himself, liyasher hadeyos. All inyanim and Torah are given to straighten out our minds. In other words, there's the spiritual aspect of the halacha, the lesson which we can derive from the halacha. Rebbe continues, each and every yid is in the category of a shoyel. We all borrow. Whom do we borrow from? The Rebishter. He gives us all our needs, provides us with whatever we need, whether we are worthy of it or we are not worthy of it, he still gives us. So it's not that by him giving us, he pays us for something, he compensates us, he just gives. But on the other hand, this puts us into the responsibility of a shayel, of one who borrows. And the responsibilities of a shayel are very strong ones. Any slight thing that goes wrong, a shayel is responsible. However, ba'alav imoy, if the balabas is present, when the damage happens, then the shayel is not responsible. When a yid says Moida Ani every morning, which means that he's witnessing the presence of the Rebishter in his midst, and as we go on saying in braches, Elekai neshama shenasata b'tohirahi, ata verasa, ata yitzarta, va'ata mishamra b'kirbi. And you, Rabbeinu Shalom, are guarding the neshama which is within me. That means we are realizing the presence of the Rebishter, that the Rebishter is here by every single person. If so, we are in the category of the shoyel, the one that is borrowing, but ba'alav imoy, the balabas is present. So when the balabas is present, this takes away the obligation that we cannot punish the shoyel and make him pay for any damage which he made. The same the Rebbe says, when the yid takes an attitude of ba'alav imoy, that the balabas, his master, is always with him, when he stresses it right away from him rising in the morning, Maidani, and we go on saying Vata Mishamra Bikirbi, that the Rebishter is here and he guards our neshama and is with us constantly at all times. A yid does not deserve to pay for any damage which he caused, does not deserve any oishin, any punishments. Why? Because though we are take shoyel, we are getting a flow of our needs from the Rebishter, and the Rebishter is giving us more than we deserve. But at the same time, even if we do cause any damages, we are not obligated to pay for them, meaning we are not getting any oinshim, we are not getting any penalties from the Rabbeinu Shalom. Why? Because the Rabbeinu Shalom, we are putting the Rebishter in the position of ba'alav imoy, that the Rebishter is always with us. And when the Rebishter is always with us, then we are potter, we are not obligated to pay, even if we caused damage, we've done things wrong, still we should not be punished for it. Why? Because ba'alav imoy, a yid that realizes that the Rebishter is always with him, the Rebishter is always there at all times, our master is with us, then we are potter, we would not have an obligation of paying for the damages which we caused. The Rebbe concluded the Farbrengen that we are all hoping and praying for the biggest Didon Notzach. And when will that be? That will be with the coming of Mashiach. The real Didon Notzach, the real overcoming, the real Nitzachin, when will that be? When Mashiach will come. And that is why it is important that we constantly beg from the Rebishter for the coming of Mashiach. And not like those that when we sing or we scream out Masai, how much longer will we be in Gullus? There are those that they don't really scream. They are looking at their neighbors, person sitting next to them. And if their neighbor is shouting loud, then this will affect them, that it's not nice, so he also has to shout along. But if his neighbor is not shouting, so this is enough reason for him also to sit and keep quiet. This is not the way we have to demand from the Rebishter. The Rebishter should take us out of Golus. We have to demand, all of us, demanding from the Rebishter that it's already the highest point, that the Rebishter should take us out of Golus. And Ad Mosai, how much longer will we be in Golus? And Rebbe concluded that now that we are the days of Kislev, the proper days to prepare ourselves for the days of Tes Kislev and Yud Kislev, and for Yud Tes Kislev, the Rebbe concluded that We spoke previous Farbrengens of various Mamorim, various Kunteresim which are being printed. Rebbe says there's another Kunteres being printed, some more Mamorim. This will begin with the pasuk Prozois Teishev Yerushalayim, that Yerushalayim will be open, will be porotz. Stemming from the word Prozois Teishev Yerushalayim. In other words, Yerushalayim will be in a position of accommodating all Yidden. This also has to do with Hakel. This is the year which we are in. We are now in a year of Hakel. Hakel is an important year when we have to reach out to everybody, to men, to women, to children. And it was early in the Farbrengen, I think when the Rebbe also stressed the union of Hakel, the Rebbe mentioned what the Gemara says, that why are children brought also in the Beis HaMikdash to Hakel. So the Gemara tells us, Losei schar lemiviyayim. What brings a reward to those that bring the children? The fact that they are bringing children. The bringing children is a reward for those that bring them. It says, what is the reward which the Torah has found for parents? That they have to bring their children to Hakel. And by bringing children to Hakel, this is a reward. This in itself is a reward for the parents. For other things, they're not getting a reward. What are people getting a reward for? What is schar lemiviyayim? What is schar to parents? For the fact that they are bringing children. So Hakel is a year where we have to involve everybody. Anoshim, noshim, v'taf, men, women, and children. And what is the ultimate goal of all of this, of the whole union of Hakel? That it all leads to liyiras Hashem Elokeichem, that all the people we are reaching out to this special year is to see to it, to uplift every single Yid, that every Yid should become a God-fearing Yid, liyiras Hashem Elokeichem.